Now for something a little bit different, apparently. Let me associate myself, first of all, with the things my colleagues said earlier. I thought they were excellent. I was very moved by all of them. John Eastman and I went to school, to the same school, different times, but we had a professor at Claremont named Bill Rood. He was a professor of international relations. He had a couple different, ideas and sayings, but one of his sayings was, either you run the show or the show runs you. It's kind of a common sense thing, really, since the dawn of time. Either you're in charge or somebody else is in charge. If you're in charge, you get to live in America as a free man or woman. Somebody else is in charge, not so free. It's an important commonsensical lesson. It should seem obvious. Not so obvious today. The other thing, Dr. Rood, he had a course called Constitutional Development in the West. And he spent a few, over the course of a semester, a study of, over 1,000 years of the history of the West, this thing all of us live in, trying to look at what had transpired in the course of the West that would have something to do with the forming of our Constitution, or how we think in the West of a Constitution. And no one has a Constitution like we Americans. But if Dr. Rood were still alive, I think he'd say that when it comes to America today, that constitutional development has gone from a written constitution that people used to take seriously to a constitution that lives in name only. And that the other side, both, I would say, Democrats and Republicans who are termed these days the uniparty, along with the courts and the bureaucracy, they think of themselves as the power over the Constitution. They want to give the Constitution the look and feel that it matters, when in fact they're the power. They do everything. And in agreeing with John, I think this last election and the way it was conducted and the way it has really transpired since then is a real indictment of the American left and Republicans and the bureaucracy that both of them created, so that today we don't have a constitution. Without being at all dramatic, we don't really have a republic. America as we know it is over with. And the only question is, what comes next? And can in that period of time, can we reform the country back to what it was? Because it's not operating correctly today. And I think anybody who is a patriot needs to embrace that. Because there's a lot of, as our colleague Steve Bannon would say, hopium, right? And there's a lot of Republicans, a lot of conservatives. I think much of the Federalist Society, for instance. Everything's going to be fine. We just got to get past this guy, Donald Trump, right? If we get past Trump, then everything's going to go back and we'll have nice boys like George W. Bush or Mitt Romney running for president. And the country will get back to where it was. When Trump fundamentally says he's going to make America great again, that was a war cry against the administrative state. Because they knew the administrative state, the deep state, any part of the modern bureaucracy, knew that to make America genuinely great again meant to dismantle that bureaucracy and to genuinely restore constitutional government and to genuinely treat the American people as if they were free men and women, citizens of a free country. That's what we don't have today. And it seems to me, really that's what we have to get back. This professor, Dr. Rood, he would use this kind of analogy, which I think is important. Today in Beijing, there are 30 men in a room. There are probably 300 rooms like that in Beijing, in their Ministry of Defense. or in their security services. And they are sitting around all day trying to figure out, how do you bring down the United States? That is their full-time job. It's not like, they get together every once in a while to sort these things out. Every day, every hour of every day, someone in China, in their Ministry of Defense, thousands of people are figuring out how to take down the United States. That's their job. Why wouldn't it be their job? They think they're the master race of the planet. They have 1.4 billion people. They spend $16 billion annually in the United States in intelligence and influence operations against us. Think about that number, $16 billion. They are serious. We underestimate them. We take them completely for granted, as if we simply trade with them. Frank and I and Steve Bannon found the Committee on the Present Danger China in February of 2019. We found it because we think the American people do not adequately understand the threat from Communist China. Many Republicans, if not most Republicans, especially in Congress, they really do treat this more like the Chamber of Commerce, a Chamber of Commerce issue. That, yes, the Chinese do certain things, but in general, we trade with them. We can't decouple with them. We just have to figure out ways of getting along. When, in fact, we start this in February of 2019, during that period, President Trump is talking about ending fundamentally Communist China's theft of intellectual property in this country. That theft of intellectual property, you'll appreciate these numbers, was $500 billion a year, still is, and it's been going on for at least about the last dozen years at that level, more before then. That's over now $7 trillion, low estimate, $7 trillion in American intellectual property has been stolen. We don't manufacture things here in this country, right? We give that to China. And then when we do produce intellectual property, we watch as Communist China steals it to the tune of, as I say now, $7 trillion. Imagine the deficit. President Trump says that's going to end. Within 2 months of that, so May of 2019, in the People's Daily, Communist China declares a people's war against the United States. And they declared the people's war to stop the aggressive greed of the Trump administration and the American people. That was a quote. They thought it was their right to steal our intellectual property because we Americans are lesser human beings meant for their service. You see, they're the master race. They're the Central Kingdom or Middle Kingdom. We have been sleepwalking here in this country and not realizing that we're at war. If you look at America today, you will see that in our Pentagon, in our State Department, in our intelligence community, the central issue will be how to incorporate LGBTQ people into our society, into our foreign missions abroad, how to deal with global warming. That's the real danger. The Justice Department that used to investigate under President Trump Communist China, when Joe Biden became president, stopped that. Not going to do that anymore. The real problem were white Christian nationalists. That's the real problem. The country, as I say, is deeply broken. Now, that's the bad news. Good news is we still are the land of the free and the home of the brave, John. We're putting all our chips on that. And to Trevor's point, there's a lot more of us than there are of them. If there weren't, they wouldn't have to lie so viciously and gaslight us as much. They engage in gaslighting at a level heretofore unseen anywhere in world history. Even in the worst parts of the Soviet Union, the Soviets would lie, but everyone would know it was a lie, and no one would believe the lie. Here, they tell the lie, and substantial numbers of people believe it. And they'll get away with it until we stand up. So there's a job to do. I've been working on myself, because I investigated after the 2020 election. Friends asked if I'd go, friends in the White House asked if I'd go to Arizona and Nevada to investigate what went on, to try to figure it out. I'm a guy who runs a think tank, right? I don't even get involved in elections, don't understand these things. I mean, I understand elections, but that wasn't really my business. But they said, will you go look? That's how few friends the Trump administration had. So I go to Arizona and Nevada and try to figure out, was the election stolen? And what I realized very quickly was that private individuals are not going to figure this out. That the very process of an election is so opaque that you simply can't see into what's happening. We saw, like in Pennsylvania, they started getting cardboard to cover up the windows so that people couldn't see in. The people who were allowed in really weren't allowed to see the process. I was looking at it, what had transpired in Arizona, what happened in Nevada. I was part of the team going in on December 1st, 2020, in Clark County, Nevada, to try to figure out what was going on. And what was clear to me was the people in Nevada who were in the registrar's office, they didn't steal the election, in my judgment. But they were going to have no way of stopping someone from stealing the election. Whether it was the maintenance of the voting machine to the submission of ballots, they really couldn't figure that out themselves. I will say about the machines, by the way, the electronic voting machines, because in anytime you get to a group like this, that subject always comes up. And let me just say, another sign that we have no Constitution, we have no First Amendment right to criticize the machines. If you criticize them, you will be arrested. You will be sued. That in itself should be a real red flag to anybody. The real shocker, we were talking about this recently, so Fox News gets sued by Dominion Voting for like $1.5 billion. And Dominion Voting had been purchased a year and a half previous for $50 million. Do the math. It had been purchased by, as an aside, Staple Street Capital, which was a investment firm partially owned by Communist China. Or Communist China was an investor in the purchase of Dominion Voting through Staple Street Capital. But they buy it for $50 million. And then Fox settles for $875 million out of $1.5 billion. So did Fox News fund, the use of electronic voting systems forever in this country? Because now Dominion Voting has a pretty good war chest to make sure that we keep on using that kind of a voting system. I've written this long piece for the Claremont Institute recently, and it's called "Is a Free Election Still Possible?" And what I speculate and just try to, with you today, let me try to suggest that Communist China, with their $16 billion annual intelligence and influence budget, is not going to leave our election harmless. Why would they? They're sitting around in rooms like this, figuring out how to take us down. And so it's not like they're looking at each other and saying, Xing, I know we spend $16 billion a year trying to take these guys down, but come on, an American election? This thing is sacred, man. We couldn't touch this. Or are they saying, how are we going to do that? Now, Frank Gaffney and I and others did one of our webinars on a biolab in Reedley, California, by Chinese nationals. So in Reedley, California, they have basically a warehouse that they've turned into, the Chinese have, a bioweapons lab complete with Ebola and anthrax. It's only discovered after the fact, and it had a whole bunch, it was very extensive, had 1,000 experimental mice in there, many of whom had died when they had to bug out of the place. But they had put serious money into this. And it was only discovered by accident when I think a local official driving by noticed like a sprinkler hose on or something was not quite kosher. But it wasn't discovered by our intelligence communities or our domestic, law enforcement. It was discovered by accident. It really inspired me the notion that, okay, well, we know Communist China has warehouses all over the country. What would it take in the 7 swing states to produce 1 million ballots in each of the 7 swing states and make sure they got into the system? All 7 of those swing states will use mail-in ballots at some level. It takes a printing press, right? A copy machine, right? They have access to computers, copying machines. They have access to the paper that's going to be used. They can have access to the voter files. They have, through artificial intelligence, the means to acquire everyone's signature. They could, through those means, produce the perfect absentee ballot. They're not going to vote Brooke, who votes all the time. They're going to vote Sid, who never votes. He's on the voter rolls. He's on the voter rolls. He's not voted in the last 5 elections. And so when they use his name and address and print that up in their warehouse, they're voting someone who's not going to complain about them voting because he'll never know. They could produce in the 7 swing states millions of perfect ballots that the system will not stop. If you're Communist China, how hard would that be to do? It would cost less, I'm sure, than $1 a ballot out of a $16 billion annual budget they have just for this. So that part can be done. So long as we have mail-in ballots in this country operating the way we do, we will not have a free election, period. Avril Haines, the director of national intelligence, was questioned about foreign influence in the election, and she said 3 weeks ago now that the problem was still Russia. Well, I guarantee you, if she believed that, and if she thought that the Russians can do what I'm just describing, and the Russians were going to steal the election for Donald Trump that way, they would stop mail-in ballots overnight. But of course, they don't believe Russia is a threat. They are perfectly willing to have someone else steal this election, whoever that is, whether they think it's Communist China or George Soros or any one of a number of left-wing groups, Arabella Advisors, the Tides Foundation, any of those. They are going to look the other way while that transpires. That in itself is criminal in nature. We will not lift a finger for that to happen as of today. So I don't want to suggest that the other side is 10 feet tall. They're not. But as of today, if we think, even if President Trump does well in the debate tonight, that President Trump is going to win, you are sorely mistaken. And it will take more than Charlie Kirk. God bless him. I love Charlie Kirk. He's going to do everything in his power to try to get people out to vote. I think we're going to need that times 10. That Americans, our people, are going to need to wake up and realize that it will require going door to door, talking to all your neighbors, all your friends, all your family, so that people understand you will lose your country. Lose your country fundamentally. The court, as John has described, has done nothing and will do nothing about this. Now, one would think they would know, and I was joking with John earlier, like, if you ask me who the vice president should be, the vice presidential candidate with President Trump, one of them is Clarence Thomas. Not only is he a great man who demonstrated more courage, as much courage as President Trump throughout his career, but from my point of view, I'm thinking, let's go all in, right? How many people do you know who wouldn't walk door to door for a Trump-Thomas ticket? Even if you weren't wild about Donald Trump, I'm crazy about Donald Trump. Even if you weren't, Trump and Thomas, that's the kind of thing where, like, I don't know a Christian I know who wouldn't go out and walk, because they're going to need to. And the left-wing media, their heads would explode. It would be, now, and people will say, well, look, Thomas would have to, if he got elected, he'd have to leave the court. Well, if he didn't get elected, he'd still be on the court, right? If we did get elected, Thomas would be a great advisor to President Trump on rebuilding the court. If we lose, the Democrats are going to steal, in my scenario, they're going to steal the presidency, the House, and the Senate. Why wouldn't they? If you're stealing an election, why won't you steal all of it? Right? In the communist China, if they were involved last time, and even though I can't prove it to you, I think they were involved this way last time, just in the production of ballots. If they steal this election, they will pack the court. They'll change all the rules. They will pack the Supreme Court. It'll go from 9 to 13, 14, whatever they think they need. They'll add 4 states. They'll remake America. The reason to go all in with Clarence Thomas is it's all or nothing here, in my judgment. Why not go for it? Why not let people know this is what's at stake here? Anybody who's complacent about this election is making a big mistake. I know all of you are not, because you wouldn't be here if you were. Can President Trump win? And I say this as a private citizen, not as someone part of a think tank. Yes, absolutely. But it will require us doing that, going door to door, having a whistleblower program. Trevor and I were talking about this, having a whistleblower program for people to report any fraud that they see. And then finally, humbling ourselves before God, asking his forgiveness, and hoping he shines his light on us on Election Day one more time. With that, let me thank you for being here. Thank you for all you do. And it's great being in North Carolina. Thanks.